Hi, folks. This is Dalton Mortimer, the Authenticator, coming to you with the obligatory thing that all YouTubers that deal with movies and art deal with every January, which is the obligatory top 10 list, both best and worst. We will get to the worst possibly in the next video. I figured we should at least start with things that are likely to be positive, but because it's me, there will still be rants, and because it's me, I know that's what you guys are expecting, because unlike most of Hollywood, I know upon which side my bread is buttered, therefore, even in the positive video, you will get rants from me. Thus is the natural state of things. In any case, um, In any case, I figured we should at least start with a couple honorable mention, namely because they were originally my 9 and 10, and then I thought of two movies that deserved to be on the list more, so it felt weird not including them because they were at one point in my mind worthy of being part of the top 10, and now they're not, so honorable mention status for them. The first honorable mention is Sonic 2, because frankly, it's nice to actually see someone in Hollywood realize, hey, if we actually give people what they want and expect from a franchise, they like it and are willing to spend money and effort on it. Who knew? Please, director of Sonic 2, expedite this knowledge to everyone else in Hollywood if you don't frickin' mind. It would make everyone's lives so much easier. The first Sonic was a better version of what usually happens when you do live action adaptations of cartoons. Namely, that normally they crash and burn because they don't understand the IP and they don't understand how you would work people into that setting. But the second one is slowly inching more and more towards the actual Sonic lore, which is good and should be encouraged. And if the trend continues, we will eventually get a Sonic movie that has no human elements or bad cartoon adaptation elements and will be entirely contained within Sonic lore, and this would be a good thing. So, yay Sonic 2, the smaller franchise that could. Speaking of which, can we get the director of Sonic 2 on one of the larger franchises, please? Like if Marvel stroke MCU wants to get their shit together in Phase 6 or so, and or if DC is not resigned to shitting the bed a second time, despite what the firing of Henry Cavill and all the other actors that people actually like while keeping the ones people don't would imply. Yeah, DC, if you don't want to shit the bed a second time, um, investing in directors that actually seem to understand how fan bases work would be a good thing. Anyway, that's Sonic 2. That's honorable mention number 1. Honorable mention number 2 is Bullet Train. I really, really have started to like what I'm tentatively calling the John Wick universe, because in my head, all of the movies made kind of in the same vein as John Wick by the same production company as John Wick are all in the same universe, and that might include a one you're about to see on the list proper here in a second. But yeah, Bullet Train, it's good, it's colorful, it does a basic bitch kind of quasi street level shoot 'em up without being dull, bland, realistic air quotes and boring. So yay, Bullet Train. Um, that being said, it's not the best of the pseudo John Wicks produced by the production company of John Wick this year, and that's why it's not on the top 10 list, because there's one better than it that fits this very same mold. And on that note, we should probably get into the fucking top 10 proper with Violent Night, number 10. Um, see, before we get too far into this list, there's something that I'm going to have to do a mini rant about, because it's worth doing a mini rant about, that's going to become one of my most consistent criteria for what makes a movie worthy of being on the good list this year. And that word, a word that appears to have gone all but extinct in Hollywood, is this thing we like to call sincerity. Because here's the thing. and I'm going to address this criticism to all artists everywhere in relation to Hollywood or mass market entertainment. Ahem. Dear artists, fuck your themes and fuck your ethereal intent. Nobody cares about your particular additions to the art you are making. The art itself is more important than you. Because here's the thing. It is not the artist's job to grandstand over the art. It is not the art's job to serve the artist. It is the artist's job, and it always has been, to serve the art they make. Because here's the secondary rub of that particular thing. If you are a creative person, and you actually create something worth creating, that creation outranks you by default. It is not your art's job to inflate your personal ego. And it never was. It is your job to put your ego aside where possible and filter the art as though you're a medium or a radio antenna picking up a signal. I.e., take the art that already exists somewhere out there in the ether and ground it in the real world, using yourself as the intermediary or middleman. That is what an artist's job is. And how this pertains to Violent Night is very simple. Rather than be all pseudo-intellectual with my themes and my socio-political import, they understood the notion that the value of the thing was contained in the thing, and thereby they proceeded to just create the best, most fun, and most engaging, i.e. most sincere, version of what they were presenting. They took a concept to its logical and most engaging, most fun extreme, and it was badass, fun, funny, and all the other above enjoyable things that you go for in a movie. Also, once again, because in my head all the John Wick adjacent movies are in the same universe, the idea of this being the Santa Claus of the John Wick universe, first of all, makes perfect frickin' sense. Second of all, is awesome. And third of all, Santa vs. Krampus sequel movie to Violent Night when? Also, next time, can we get a Santa that's that has his full powers, please? That's my one complaint about that movie, is he spends half the time kind of depowered, and I kind of want to see a version of Santa Claus going full number 5 from Umbrella Academy on some people who deserve it. Like, that's a Christmasized version of number 5 from Umbrella Academy going apeshit on some people is exactly what I need for this franchise. And if we can throw a version of Krampus in here too, so much the better. Anyway, number 9, The Northman. I've started really, really enjoying the director of this particular movie, who previously isn't best known for the movies Midsommar and I believe also Hereditary, because while he's a little bit more artsy-fartsy about it than I would prefer, it is one of the best portrayals of occultism in a sort of action movie / horror movie context, particularly in the sense that most of his movies are not, pagan is the wrong word, but rooted in polytheistic pre-Christian European folklore. And in this case, it was really interesting seeing someone actually take the Norse sagas and go, what if we made this into an action movie? Especially because, let's face it, movies specifically about, like, old school quasi-mythological masculinity are in short supply here, and Vikings kicking mythological ass as per the sagas, while simultaneously having very trippy metaphysical aspects as per the director of Hereditary and Midsommar. I'm a pretty good sell for that. Now, granted, this movie didn't make its money back, which is kind of sad because it costs more money than they got out of it. But unfortunately, in the realms of more independent-ish cinema, that happens sometimes. Um, but regardless, even if it didn't make its financial money back, it's a damn good movie, and it deserves all the notoriety that being number 9 on this list might accrue it. The Northman isn't for everyone, but it's a damn good time. So there's that. Number 8, Terrifier 2. Speaking of movies that are sincere to a fault and just embrace what they are to the highest degree with no frills, themes, authorial intent, or pretensions, Terrifier 2. It's essentially an independently funded horror movie, and it goes completely balls to the wall. Which, again, embracing what you are and being sincere about it is probably my biggest selling point in the modern Hollywood zeitgeist. No frills, no pretensions, no themes, no bullshit. Just be the best version of what you are and embrace it to the highest degree as you can afford to do. Yay. And add to that Terrifier 2 is also a kick-ass horror movie, which will probably make you freak the fuck out several times over. And goes so many layers over the top that it almost deserves to be clapped for on that basis alone. Yeah, next. Number 7. DC's The Batman. If Todd Phillips' Joker from 2019 was basically the superhero genre equivalent of Scorsese's King of Comedy by way of the backstory elements of The Killing Joke, this one is the superhero genre equivalent of Seven, mixed with a few elements of Silence of the Lambs, although not quite as many as it should have. We'll get to that when I get into my one problem with this movie. By way of Batman Year 1 or Year 2. And if that sounds appealing to you, then you already probably have seen this movie, but you need to see it again because it's good. My only I have a couple complaints with this. Number one, it does delve a little bit too much into modern themes than I would like, because of course we have to bitch at Bruce Wayne for classism issues, and of course somebody has to bring up privilege, and of course the villain, who otherwise would be the Riddler, has to be made into a 4chan using incel because reasons. But all that is basically superficial window dressing that I'm pretty sure Matt Reeves put in there just to get the Twitter mob off his back, and then proceeded not to really connect to anything like functionally in the movie itself, like the core of the movie itself. So yeah, that's fine. My other problem with this, well, my second problem with this movie is, for some reason, much like Christopher Nolan before him, Matt Reeves did the thing again where my Batman doesn't exist in an interconnected universe with other heroes. My Batman is a solo act and only deals within his own pocket of the universe. Just stop. It was annoying when Christopher Nolan did it. It is absolutely egregious when you do it. We live in the world where you actually can have all these characters finally coexisting in an interconnected universe. We're not going back to the way it was before, nor should we. You should, by rights, be the new Batman of the DC universe, or at least this should be tied to Batfleck somehow. Just stop with your egotistical pretensions. You're doing a Batman movie. Batman exists in the DC universe. Deal the fuck with it. Also, the only like substantive problem I have with this movie is there's a scene in the deleted scenes of this movie where we get the Joker, if the Joker was Hannibal Lecter, which, aside from anything else, is something that I've been hoping for years now, and is a really, really badass version of the Joker. and the scene is not in the movie. Now, granted, it's because the Joker of this generation is, for better or worse, Joaquin Phoenix, just like the Joker of the previous generation was Heath Ledger, and the Joker in the generation previous to that was Mark Hamill, not Jack Nicholson, but Mark Hamill. Sorry, Jack, but you were too much yourself and not enough the character when you played him in '89. Whatever. It's my list. I can rant as much as I like. But yeah, for better or worse, there's a Joker for every generation, and the Joker of this generation is Joaquin Phoenix. So it was probably too early to introduce the next iteration of the character. But the prospect of the Joker as Hannibal Lecter in a world that very much is taking cues from Silence of the Lambs is too awesome not to have. So I want. And if you need to connect them somehow, just say that this is like the second Joker who was inspired by Joaquin Phoenix's version. Done. Anyway, next we have number 6, Death on the Nile. I really, really love the Kenneth Branagh upscale, high-budget remakes of Hercule Poirot mysteries. Aside from anything else, Hercule Poirot just needs to be more respected as a fictional detective. He's basically the runner-up to the mantle after Sherlock Holmes, and I like seeing him in general. I also really like this particular version because it does the almost monk-like thing where the reason he's good at being a detective is because he's hypersensitive and notices everything and has an obsessive compulsive notion of like existential order. That is a perfect backstory for any detective, and I really, really love that they focused on that element here. I basically love whenever a detective character focuses on that. Like, I believe Elementary, the modernized version of Sherlock Holmes, did that as well, kind of. And again, that's just, in my opinion, that's just the correct way you do a detective, especially one as socially awkward and socially isolated as a Holmes or Poirot. Also, it's very obvious to me that everyone who works in these movies loves the shit out of being in them, and Branagh is absolutely in his element playing Poirot. So, encore, Monsieur Poirot. That being said, I don't think that Death on the Nile is quite as perfect as the remake of Murder on the Orient Express was, but also Death on the Nile was never quite as big a deal in terms of adaptations or in terms of Agatha Christie's oeuvre as Murder on the Orient Express became. That was her watershed moment. That was her Hound of the Baskervilles. So I understand why adapting Death on the Nile not gonna go over quite as flawlessly as the remake of Murder on the Orient Express did. Still a damn good movie though, and I still want more Poirot. And according to the people behind the Branagh Poirot movies, we're getting a third one, so yay. Encore, Monsieur Poirot. And with that, we move on to number 5, Black Adam. Yes, this movie is not perfect. Yes, it has flaws. Yes, the writing occasionally mimics something like a comic book movie from 2005, like the Constantine type movie, or even possibly earlier than that, like A League of Extraordinary Gentlemen. That being said, what we also get in Black Adam is basically, imagine if you took the most iconic scenes from every movie, from every comic book or superhero movie that's been released in the last 10 years, and you took them down in terms of scale just a little tiny bit, but then you had them reoccur like 2 or 3 times when they only occurred once in their respective movies, and also sometimes having them work better. Yes, in some people's opinion, I can see how that might turn into, we're just ripping off all of these great moments. But in practice, in my opinion, what essentially you have there is a movie that goes, what if we could promise you the greatest hits of the last 10 years of the superhero genre, all crammed into one movie and repeated like 2 or 3 times. Yes, fucking please. Also, warning, fanboying incoming. I loved, finally, getting a semi-decent version of Dr. Fate on the big screen. And I was as skeptical of Pierce Brosnan as it was possible to be. When he was announced, you guys can go back and look at the live streams we did. I was terrified of the possibility of Pierce Brosnan screwing it up. Absolutely terrified. But hand to Naboo, he did it. And they didn't focus too much on the stupid possession thing. They did give Kent himself the necessary respectability and the necessary sort of world-weary wizardness that I look for in not just any magic user, but a master magic user, which Fate definitely is. And honestly, given the choice between seeing more of Pierce Brosnan's Dr. Fate in the DC universe and seeing more of Benedict Cumberbatch's Doctor Strange in the MCU, I will take more of Dr. Fate. Now, granted, I've always preferred Fate a little bit more than I preferred Strange, but more to the point, the DCEU version of Dr. Fate gives us something that the MCU version of Doctor Strange has not yet managed in 5 frickin' movies, which is a magic user who studies in magic have actually managed to make him wiser and more measured and more composed. Unfortunately, because, we have to do at least one stupid thing that every version of Dr. Fate outside of the comics does, which is Kent dies at the end of this movie, and we have to play what I call musical chairs with the helm, i.e., pass the helm off to the next person. It's not like Kent was important or anything, which, no, he is, but that's going to get into another video I have planned coming up, which is a video on Doctor Strange, Dr. Fate, and kind of what makes them independent from each other and what makes them different from each other. Watch out for that on, presumably, I Love Comics in the coming days. But in short, it annoys me that Kent had to die, but he was also the mentor character in this movie, so mentor's got to die to give the hero motivation, whatever. Also, we could easily have gotten a prequel series of basically a Dr. Fate trilogy set in the 1920s through 1940s that could have featured him interacting with World War II and essentially founding the Golden Age JSA. I would have casted Matt Smith as a young Kent Nelson, mostly because he has the acting chops to pull off the character, and I could kind of see him aging into Pierce Brosnan. But of course, the gunning happened to the DC universe, and now we're not getting any of that. Que sera, sera. I would have asked Wes Anderson to direct if I had my druthers. Just in case, any of the DC executives is listening and calls up James Gunn and going, we are doing this now. Anyway, Black Adam is awesome. It's kind of the greatest hits of the entire superhero genre in the last 10 years, all crammed into one movie, and we got a good version of Dr. Fate and also the JSA. So I'm pretty freaking happy with how Black Adam turned out. It also, unfortunately, didn't make its money back, but who knows? Maybe it will have enough fan support that DC will decide not to shoot themselves in the foot and actually do more with it. I hope. Against hope. Anyway, on with the list. Number 4. Doctor Strange in the Multiverse of Madness. Once again, I'm well aware that this movie is very, very much not perfect, mostly due to Michael Waldron not being an experienced enough writer to go from writing one fairly decent episode of an animated sitcom and one episode of Rick and Morty to writing an entire prestige television show in Loki to one of the biggest blockbusters of the year. Like, no one except someone very, very talented could be expected to pull that transition off. Honestly, I think it would have been better off if they just had Sam Raimi write the thing in addition to directing it, but I'm not consulted with these decisions. However, despite not being consulted with these decisions, Sam Raimi and I appear to have been on the same page with regards to a sequel to Doctor Strange, which is, and I've gone on this rant before, so bear with me, But when Multiverse of Madness got announced, everyone zeroed in on Multiverse and completely forgot the rest of the freaking title. They forgot the of Madness part and they forgot the Doctor Strange part. So they were expecting Cameo City or No Way Home 2 Stranger Boogaloo. And I think most other Doctor Strange fans, didn't zero in on Multiverse. We zeroed in on Doctor Strange and of Madness, which means they're going Lovecraftian by way of, John Carpenter. And that's kind of what we got. We got a Lovecraftian horror comedy mostly for kids and families. It doesn't go quite as far as I would have gone with it because we don't see the Vishanti and we don't actually see Cthon, although props to Sam Raimi again for alluding to Cthon more than I expected any movie to ever do, but that's neither here nor there. But I really loved the route they went with Doctor Strange in the Multiverse of Madness, even though it's flawed, even though it's imperfect, and even though there are issues with it. That being said, I much prefer Doctor Strange in a Lovecraftian horror comedy for kids and families than I would in all the multiverse cameos, and also Doctor Strange is here for some reason. So this is much more the movie I wanted than I think what most of the internet was expecting, which again is kind of a No Way Home to Stranger Boogaloo. So yeah, I'm happy with Multiverse of Madness. It's not perfect. There's plenty of room for improvement, but with Sam Raimi at the helm, I expect we will get that improvement. And hopefully the black pills will stop bitching once the writing is a little better. He said hopefully. What are we on? 3? Hellraiser 2022 is not only a very, very good reboot / sequel / remake, it's probably the best Hellraiser movie since the second one, without question. And for me personally, I think it actually might be my favorite of the Hellraiser movies. And I know that's heresy. I know it's complete heresy, and I will be stoned and burned at the stake for it later. But here's the thing. This movie does what I've always wanted Hellraiser to do more of, which is give me the lore. Explain the lore to me. Give me a reason to engage with this particular franchise on like an intellectual level. And this movie does one thing that I have to give it massive props for doing, which is it explains why someone who actually knows what the puzzle box is would engage with it. Because in most Hellraiser movies, the reason the puzzle box is employed at all is because someone who doesn't know what the puzzle box is fiddling with it because they don't know what it is, and then they wind up in the trap of the Cenobites because, you open this door without realizing what was behind it, and now you're fucked. This movie, on the other hand, kind of treats the Cenobites more like classical demons in the sense that if you solve the puzzle box, you get the prospect of a wish, and that wish has to be within 7 different categories, but they're broad enough that you could almost make it work. And of course, because the Cenobites are the Cenobites, and they have evolved their perspective on sensation to such a degree that their distinctions between pleasure and pain are basically non-existent, of course, there's going to be a you made a deal with the devil style catch, especially because in order to make the puzzle box work, you have to murder 7 people to make it evolve through its various iterations and unlock them. But it at least explains why someone who actually knows what the puzzle box is would engage with it, other than just nihilistic shits and giggles. And I like that. I also like that the Cenobites are more like kind of their original conception in the first Hellraiser one, or more like traditional demons than in other movies, because slowly but surely in the other Hellraiser movies, we focused more on how the Cenobites used to be human, and I don't want the Cenobites to be human. I also don't want them to be like classically mustache twirlingly evil. I like the notion that why they do what they do isn't out of malice. It's out of, we have evolved our perspective to such a degree that we can't tell the difference between pleasure and pain anymore, and we actually kind of consider them the same thing. That is a much more compelling, much more quasi-Lovecraftian element of them than, oh, we're just mustache twirlingly evil and we want to destroy things. Pass. But yeah, Hellraiser 2022 is amazingly good, and while no one is going to surpass David Bradley's Hell Priest by any stretch of the imagination, I really liked what the woman who played the 2022 Hell Priest was doing. I also have a theory that this isn't actually a remake or a reboot, it's a continuation, because it occurred to me that what if Cenobites were kind of organized into squads, and each squad is headed by a Hell Priest, who is the pin-headed one, and they all have, for example, a Chatterer or a Hell Beast or so on and so, especially because we do see recurring design elements in the various Cenobites, even in the classic movies. So I choose to see this as Doug Bradley's Hell Priest and the new girl's Hell Priest are essentially co-workers who just happen to head different squads of Cenobites. That appeals to me. Anyway, Hellraiser 2022 is probably the best horror movie of the year and the best contribution to the Hellraiser franchise since the first two, at the very least, and possibly arguably the best one. So that's why it's number 3. Number 2, Guillermo del Toro's Pinocchio, which I have to specify because this year there were 3 freaking Pinocchio movies. And Del Toro's was unsurprisingly the only good one of the bunch. But to be fair to it was very, very good. It was almost like it sucked out all the quality that was potentially inherent in the Robert Zemeckis one for Disney and the Pauly Shore one, and was like, I will be taking that into myself. That being said, there is one massively glaring problem with Guillermo del Toro's Pinocchio. Otherwise, it would probably be number 1 because I am a massive fan of Guillermo del Toro. I often like to say when I was a kid I loved Tim Burton movies. By the time I was a teenager, I started loving Guillermo del Toro movies. Although to be fair, I loved Hellboy, which was one of Guillermo del Toro's even when I was a little kid. So this was sort of predestined that I would always love Guillermo del Toro. But nevertheless, there is one massively glaring problem with Guillermo del Toro's Pinocchio, and it's similar to the problem with Shape of Water, which is the movie that got released a couple of years ago that actually finally won Guillermo his Oscar, and it was well deserved. But it had this problem where Lady in the Water is essentially a monster movie, but what if the girl who was taken by the monster actually wanted to be with the monster romantically? It's essentially, what if the monster was actually the good guy and the humans were actually the bad guys? And that should have been enough premise to sustain Shape of Water. But modern Hollywood is modern Hollywood, and therefore we had to spend at least a third of the movie cucking to social justiceism. And thus it was, as much as I enjoy Shape of Water, it ruined, to some extent, what could have been a very good movie. And Guillermo del Toro's Pinocchio has the same thing, but in this case, the forced talking point du jour is, as we all know, Pinocchio is an Italian fairy tale. So Guillermo, in his infinite cucking to the establishment narrative, decided to set this version of Pinocchio in Mussolini's Italy under fascism. And here commenceth the rant. Dear everyone in Hollywood and in the powers that be, in the modern day, First World West, and in particular in the Anglosphere, Fascism is a practical non-entity. It is a non-entity. I know you're all scared out of your minds that fascism might actually make a resurgence in the 21st century. I know. But here's the thing. Those fears are not founded on anything resembling logic or reality. And nor is the alt-right a precursor to fascism, or nor would it even be able to be. Because here's the thing. The closest things we have to actual IRL fascists or white nationalists in the modern day West are childish, dick-headed, upper middle class, wannabe incompetent cartoon supervillains. That includes Richard Spencer, that includes Jean-Francois Gary P, for what little anyone remembers him, that includes Nick Fuentes, and that includes, apparently, to everyone's confusion, including himself probably, Kanye West. Every member of the actual legitimately diagnosable alt-right is a childish, dick-headed wannabe cartoon supervillain. So incompetent that Dr. Drac and Dr. Doofenshmirtz and Dr. Evil would take turns beating them up and taking their lunch money. The only thing you could consider fascist in the modern day West is something that you will never ever address if you are a believer in the establishment narrative, which is there is something resembling fascism in the modern day West if you apply what, for rhetoric's sake, I'm going to call Churchill's razor. For those that don't know, Churchill famously had a phrase where he said, "The fascists of the future will call themselves anti-fascists." And if you apply that razor, there are a certain number of people who, in the name of anti-fascism, are literally walking us into a fascist state. People like Yvette Falorca and Chanta Driver, who run a particularly nasty cell of Antifa known as BAM, or By Any Means Necessary, the people who established the Chaz. Or, if you want to go more directly by the book of what, Giovanni Gentile referred to fascism as, which is everything within the state, nothing outside the state, nothing against the state, we have people like the international bureaucrats, such as Klaus Schwab, Guy Verhofstadt, and of course, the granddaddy of them all, Mr. George Soros. If you actually want to apply fascism in a way that makes sense, i.e. by applying Churchill's razor, as I just outlined, maybe we could have that conversation. But the fascism that you think is so resurgent, i.e. the anti-establishment, populist, libertarian, center-left and center-right, is not fascism. Fascism, in that sense, is a non-entity and a joke in the modern-day West. Here endeth the rant about an otherwise really, really amazing movie. I apologize for that sidebar, but it needed to be said to all of Hollywood that fascism as they fear it is a non-entity, and the fascism as they don't fear it, i.e. the one that calls itself anti-fascist, the one they keep filleting for no good reason, is at best the closest thing they have to an actual threat. Anyway, that's the main reason why Guillermo del Toro's Pinocchio is not number one. Everything else about it, everything that actually pertains to Pinocchio being Pinocchio, is freaking amazing and a masterclass in cinematic craftsmanship, especially in animation, than anyone could ask for. So, if you can ignore the thing I just spent like 5 minutes ranting about, we have to talk about fascism even though it's a political non-entity in the West thing, you'll be fine. Yeah. Anyway, on to the number one best movie of the year, which is Everything, Everywhere, All at Once. I know I just dumped all over the concept of a multiverse like 2 or 3 entries ago, but as long as it doesn't revolve around making a otherwise mystical character forced into a multiverse, like it was kind of with Doctor Strange, or would have been with Doctor Strange if the internet had gotten their way, I don't mind the concept of a multiverse. It just, magic and the multiverse aren't related, is all I'm saying. But that being said, Everything Everywhere All at Once also has the benefit of basically showing what independent cinema or small-scale cinema should be, i.e., it doesn't prattle on about themes or authorial intent. It just uses a smaller, more independent movie studio to tell the most fun, interesting, and compelling story it can. If that was the standard of independent cinema, I might not hate independent cinema as much as I do. Because most modern day independent cinema, the standard is how much can we instrumentalize this piece of art, and how much can we make it as boring and unentertaining as possible? Because in order for it to be intellectual, it has to be as dull as we can conceivably make it. But Everything Everywhere All at Once does not do that. It crams in as much genre bending fun as the best upscale blockbuster. And it should be the thing that we encourage independent cinema to be more of, in my humble opinion. Again, like I said at the beginning, if you're noticing the theme is the theme of this list is stop with the fucking themes and just tell a interesting, compelling story in an interesting, compelling world with interesting and compelling characters and epic amounts of stylization. That is win state for the redemption of modern arts. Hopefully, Hollywood learns the lesson. They might just learn the lesson of, hey, if we put enough money into independent cinema, sometimes it does well. And at that point, if they don't change their philosophical ways, we'll be beating our head into a brick wall. But for now, encourage movies like The Northman and Everything Everywhere All at Once and Terrifier 2. Discourage everything that we're going to talk about in the next video, where I go through the worst list. And if sincerity is my main sincerity and treating things like an end in themselves is my criteria for a good movie, you can guess how many times I'm going to rant about instrumentalizing art and jamming themes and boredom down people's throats in the name of being intellectual is going to feature in my bad list. But that's a story for another day. Cheers, guys. I will see you in the next one.